Okay, sounds great.
Go right ahead.
I guess we'll get started then. Good morning, everybody. My name is David Shea, and I am the head of cataloging at the Irvin Department of Rare Books and Special Collections at the University of South Carolina Libraries. And today we're going to talk about cataloging AV materials in RDA Mark 21. And this is going to be, like yesterday, what I call kind of a practical guide. I'm not going to go too in depth on RDA enumeration. I'm just going to try and cover, line by line, field by field, what you are going to need to make, um, a good, high quality, full level encoded record. Um, so yeah, so in my role as head of cataloging at the Urban Department, I have a tendency to catalog just about anything you can imagine, from books to magazines to DVDs, vinyl records, statues, firearms, just about everything under the sun. So I have to be able to do a little bit of everything. Um, so we'll take you through some AV cataloging. This is just a little bit of my background here, but I've been in just about every kind of library you can imagine over the last 10 years. Um, and here are some resources. And I should say beforehand, the slides will be available after the presentation, so you'll be able to get all these links and all the things in the slides. So right off the bat, I've got the link to the online Audiovisual Catalogers Association, OLAC. It's really great. They have a really amazing best practices document for cataloging DVDs and Blu-rays. I would encourage everyone to check it out. It's a really, really good resource. I've also below it is the link to the Music Library Association, and then Library of Congress and OCLC, Mark 21 pages, the RDA registry, which contains a lot of how to describe it. It contains a lot of controlled vocabulary for 3XX fields and various other kinds of fields, MARC relator terms, below that, and then OCLC's Ask Quality Control online office hours. It's OCLC. I know it's OCLC specific, but they have a lot of really great information. And one of the videos that they recorded recently, which I'm going to encourage everybody to take a look at, is called The Mysterious 3XX Fields, where they go, the presenters, it's a little dry, but the presenters break down a lot of the 3XX fields, recent changes to them, recent adaptations, and things with the RDA, using them with the RDA registry, and lots of ways that you can use those to help improve your catalog records. So we're going to start out with talking about DVDs and Blu-rays, and then we'll move on to CDs, both music and audiobooks. And hopefully, um, given just this kind of broad coverage, this should be able to help you adapt anything else you might need. A lot of what's if your library collects vinyl records, a lot of what is applicable to CDs is applicable to vinyl records as well, just with a few technical changes, because obviously they're different technology. So let's start right in. So here I've got a record for Rogue One, a Star Wars story, a Blu-ray edition. This is the first part of it, and the second part of it, and the third part of it. So obviously there's a lot of things going on here. We have a lot of 700 fields, and I realize I should have swapped the positions of those, but oh well. So yeah, looking at when you get into a movie, especially when you've got a big budget movie that involves tons and tons of people, you're gonna have to ask yourself how, and you're doing it, if you have to do an original catalog record or improve on an existing catalog record, you're gonna have to ask yourself, what kind of time do I have to devote to filling in some of these 700 fields and 600 fields. So you may not necessarily have time to add editor of moving image work, or necessarily director of all the production designers, but you will still want to get all of the people who are major important major parts in this, so the director, the screenwriters, producers, and actors. So, and it ultimately comes down to the good RDA phrase: use cataloger's best judgment, and deciding what is going to be the best, what is going to help your patrons get access to this item, what is going to help them make the decision that this is the item that they want, because everything ultimately in the end has to be for the patron's benefit. At least that's my kind of philosophy when it comes to cataloging. So we're going to start straight into fixed fields. So right off on the top, all DVDs and Blu-rays are going to be type G for projected medium. ELVL encoding level is going to be blank or 7. I still got an I in there, and I should fix that before I send it back out to you guys. So previously it had been capital I for OCLC folks, but OCLC and Library of Congress have been moving towards using the Library of Congress approved encoding levels: blank for full level encoding, 7 for not full level encoding. Source, cataloging source is going to be D for other, because we are not the library. None of us are the Library of Congress. None of us are cataloging for the Library of Congress. AUD and audience. Now there's a lot of different options that you can go in here. I will mention that all the fixed fields and all this stuff does correspond to MARC's different bytes in MARC 008. So if you absolutely have to fill something in on the bytes in a 008, you can. In theory, there are guides to doing that. So there's lots of different possible audiences. If you go into Library of Congress MARC or OCLC, Bib Formats and Standards, you can find complete breakdowns for all of those. Type of control, blank. Language is 3-letter language code for the language of the material, so English. So this is a movie that is in English. Line 2, BLVL, so this is still a monograph. It's a single item. It's not a collection or anything like that. Form is form of item. It's going to be blank for most videos. GPub, government publication. In this case, it's a blank for no. It's not a government publication. But you could have, if you had videos from government offices, international organizations, there are codes that would fit in those. So S, for example, S for state government, F for federal government, I for international organization, like something from a United Nations organization, or large international world, the IMF or World Bank or things like that. Time, so here you record your running time in minutes. So this movie is 133 minutes. If you have something that goes beyond 999 minutes, just enter 999. MREC, this is an old outdated field, so it's just blank. And then country is country of publication, which is going to be a 2 or 3-letter code, depending on where it's from. Most other countries will have 2-letter codes. US states, Canadian provinces, the constituent nations of parts of Great Britain, and I believe Australian provinces and Chinese provinces have 3-letter codes. Most other countries have only 2-letter codes. And then the last one, fixed fields line 3. So DESC description, I for ISBD punctuation. So I'm doing this presentation to ISBD punctuation. I got a question in chat. Okay, I guess I had forgotten that. Great. Oh, so yeah, if running time exceeds 99 minutes, you enter 000 and then in a running time in 300 field. Yeah. So regardless, you're going to enter your 300 field in your running time in your 300 field. But that's good to know. I did not actually remember that. Well, great, cool. So as I was saying, DESCI for ISBD punctuation. I'm cataloging this. This presentation is going to run the ISBD punctuation. There is an increasing movement to move away from ISBD to being unpunctuated. To you're not using a lot of punctuation because it is technically a relic of physical card catalogs. It doesn't necessarily serve any technical purpose, and can potentially complicate things if you're migrating over to BibFrame, whenever that mysterious day in the future is. But again, this is something you want to make as a decision. Your library wants to make together as a decision. Are you going to move away from ISBD punctuation? If you are, you're going to want to enter C in DESC. Where's my mouse? TMAT, type of visual materials. This is V for video recording. Tech. So these are a couple different options here. You can, if you have A for animation, L for lowercase for live action, or C for combination of digital and of animation and live action. So stuff like Who Framed Roger Rabbit would be a combination. Now I know this does. So with the increasing amount of computer-generated imagery and animation in movies, I think, it is something to think about. But I think for the most part, the general, so like this movie, the Star Wars movie, has a lot of stuff done with computer-generated animation, but I believe the consensus, is lowercase l. DTST, in this case, you want to use P for distribution and release. In this example. So I've got over here in the dates, I've got the distribution date of this movie, 2017, and then I've got the original release date. So this movie was released in 2017 into theaters, or 2016 into theaters, and then distributed in 2017 on when the actual DVD came out. So I got that line down right here. Any other questions about fixed fields before we move on to onto 0xx fields? And again, if you want me to slow down or talk a little slower or go a little faster, just let me know in chat, and I can work to accommodate that. Again, everything's being recorded and the slides will be distributed. All right, so moving on, 007, physical description fixed field. So a lot of, so you're gonna see 007s in potentially anything, but for the most part, you're gonna see them in media a lot, and this is gonna give a lot of your, physical aspects of the thing that's going to be, sitting in the sort of behind the scenes. So if you're using a lot of faceting in your catalog, and a lot of this is going to be pretty fixed for pretty much everything that you do, for any given one kind of media, things are going to be relatively similar. So in your subfield A, and I'm using this double dagger mark because that's what OCLC uses for delimiters. You may see a pipe or a $sign or a double $sign. We at USC are moving over from Millennium to Ex Libris Alma. Millennium uses a pipe. Alma uses a double $sign. So we've basically got kind of three different delimiters going on in our work right now. But for the purposes of this, I'm working out an OCLC connection, so I'm using the double dagger here. All right, so your next subfield is B, D for video disc. So field D, C for multicolored, B for black if you have a black and white film. E, here we have S for Blu-ray, V for DVD. So this is S. If it was a DVD, we could V. F is A for sound is on the medium. So if you had one of those old film strips that came with a cassette tape, obviously a lot of the rest of this field would be different. Some other things might be different, but there would be a separate letter here for if the sound was not on the medium. And G is I for video disc. And subfield H, Z for other widths. This is a holdover from videotape. So subfield H is largely for width of videotape. And then subfield I, which is K for more than one sound playback configuration. So there's multiple different sound channels on the video on the DVD video. So I think it has like 2 channel and then 2.1 and then 5.1 and so on. 040 cataloging source. So this is just set up. So this is who's cataloging this item, their catalog. This catalog record is being created in English, and it is conforming to RDA standards. There are other standards you'll see in a subfield E. It's like DCRM, which is descriptive cataloging for rare materials and all of its variants. This is just like your books and so with any other kind of material that you're working with. 024 is other standard numbers. So 020 is an ISBN number. 024 is going to be for any kind of other standard number that you might have on your object. In this case, I've got subfield 1 for universal product code. This is the UPC code on this item. And then I've got a subfield Q, and in parentheses, I've got other qualifying information. So this is the UPC code for this set rather than an individual thing. So this, if you have separate DVDs versus a box set. 028 publisher number. So here we enter 4 and then 2, and then we've got a publisher number. So this will be somewhere on your object, probably on the back of the case. But otherwise, it functions just like any 020 or any other 02X field. 041 language codes. I talked about this the other day with books and language of the original. So in our first indicator here, we have 1 for includes a translation, and then no second indicator. And then in E, then here in subfield A, I have a subfield A for each audio language that's on the disk. So this has English language along with French and Spanish audio. And then in subfield J, I've included, we've got subfield J's for each subtitle language, and then a subfield H with the original language. And these are the same codes that are going up in your fixed field language code. But yeah, so you're going to want to enter a unique subfield A for every language that your DVD or Blu-ray has on it, and as well as a subfield J for each subtitle language that's available. Um, 130 main entry uniform title. Yeah, so this is used for things that have a preferred title to the title on the item. So you're going to see this a lot with movies. So we have first indicator 0 for no non-violent character, Rogue One, parentheses, motion picture. This is generally will be the title of the title with motion picture, and then sometimes you'll have other identifying dates in it. So if you have a lot of films that have been remade, so for like a remake, you would include the name, parentheses, motion picture, and then something like space 1975. If it was remade, if it was the 1975 version versus a remade version. You also see 130s used for books. so mainly so religious books. So the Bible has a 130 field, so you can see the breakdowns and all of the different subfields you could in theory use. 245, title main entry. So you're using the same indicators and subfields as you would for a book. So like for example, here we've got first indicator 1 for we entered a 130 uniform title. And we entered a 0 for no non-filing characters. We have space colon space subfield B, and then a space slash space subfield C, entering, recording people and groups responsible for directing, producing, writing, presenting the film. These are the 4 things you want to include in your statement of responsibility. Each of the separate kind of aspects or groups being separated by a semicolon. So we've got directed by Gareth Edwards, and we got our semicolon, and we've got screenplay by these two people, semicolon, and so forth. So we've got the producers. And your preferred source of your title is your title screen. So in books, your preferred source of your title is your title page. This is going to be, if you have it, the title screen. If the movie has a title screen, which I assume it should, for most, feature films, that's going to be your preferred source for the title. Any questions about 245s or anything that I've gone by before I keep going? Okay. 250 edition statements. You can use this to record any edition statement that may be present. It uses no indicators, and things you're going to want to use for are things like special edition, widescreen edition, anything obviously that has the word edition in it, but also makes some sort of statement about this being separate from this being a unique thing. So limited edition, and you can also put here I've got Blu-ray in square brackets because you can, if you wish, it's not a formal edition statement, you can use it to separate, to add an additional sort of access point for people if they're looking for a Blu-ray versus a DVD. 264, publication and distribution information. So again, a lot of these fields function just like you would for monographs, just with a few little notations. So on the back of this particular DVD case, it says distributed by Buena Vista Home Entertainment, Burbank, California. So we have a second indicator 2 for distributor. 1, as you know, is the enter for publisher, and you enter the subfields just as you would with a book. So you've got your subfield A with your location. You got your space colon space subfield B, distributor, comma, and then distribution date here in square brackets. If you have to find it a little bit, you can if there's a separate copyright date, you should enter a 264 second indicator 4. 300 physical description. There are no indicators. And in your subfield A, you're going to want to enter your number of discs with your running time in square brackets. Again, someone pointed out here, if your runtime, here's where you're going to want to enter the entirety of your runtime, so approximately 133 minutes. Your subfield B for some physical characteristics. So sound, it has sound, it's in color. You could enter black and white, no sound if you had a black and white, if you had a silent film in black and white. And then in your subfield C, you've got, where did my cursor go? There it is. You got 4 3/4 inches because all Blu-rays, DVDs, and CDs are 4 3/4 inches. And you can also use a subfield E with a plus sign, subfield E, to add any additional to mention any additional materials like booklets or posters or anything else that might have come with that. And then you'll want to note that in a 500 note field so that you can um, so that you have some additional description of what that is. 3xx fields, your technical specifications. There are a lot of different 3xx fields that can be used to encode different technical aspects of your audio visual materials. For DVDs and Blu-rays, this is going to be things like video encoding, aspect ratios, regions, and there is a full list of RDA-approved terms and their suffix codes at the RDA registry. It is not the easiest thing to parse. I'm not going to lie, but you can. But they are available there, and we can look at it later on if folks want to. Your 33x fields. This is going to how it's going to look for any. Oh, excuse me. For any kind of video disc. So two-dimensional moving image, subfield B, TDI, subfield 2, RDA content. Your 337 is video, subfield B, V, subfield 2, RDA media, video disc, subfield B, VD, subfield 2, RDA carrier, and these should be pretty much identical for any kind of DVD or Blu-ray that you have. 344 sound characteristics. So this is going to be found on your. So this is going to be a mix. What we got in the chat. Did I put one on? Oops. No, you don't need periods at the end of 336s. The rule in RDA is everything is a complete sentence, kind of, unless it's not. A lot of the 3xx fields don't need to be, so you don't need periods at the end of them. Most of your 2xx fields are going to use periods or some kind of end punctuation like square brackets. Square bracket, the closing square bracket counts as end punctuation. But 3xx fields should by and large not require them. All right, sound characteristics. So this is kind of a mix of RDA approved language and what kind of language is on the object. So we have no indicators, and this is again sound characteristics. So if people want to be able to see what kind of sound options you have on here. So we have in our subfield A, we have our audio encoding. This is digital for Blu-rays and DVDs. Your subfield B is your audio medium of encoding, which is optical because it's being read by a laser. Subfield G are playback channels, so mono, stereo, or surround. And then our subfield H, special playback characteristics, which will be described on the object. And then we've got our source of terms, which I've got a generic RDA tag in here. RDA registry is going to does provide a much more complete listing of RDA of the different RDA source terms. Now, here, so one of the differences between OCLC and the audiovisual catalogers best practices. Best practices for OLAC best practices includes, if I remember correctly, I need to actually look at it again, having all of these things in one field. OCLC, I think, increasingly wants people to separate each of the different kinds of things in 3xx fields into multiple fields, because there are multiple different kinds of controlled vocabularies that have multiple different kinds of RDA source of terms. And I'll show some of those in the next slide or two. So here we have 3, 4, 6 video characteristics. This is the video format. You have no indicators, straight into a subfield B. So this is with the broadcast standard. We have NTSC. Any type of video that is encoded in North America and Japan is going to use NTSC. And the RDA registry specific term for this is RDA-BS, RDA broadcast standard. So the other major broadcast standard that I can think of is PAL. PAL is what's most video encoded for television broadcast in Europe uses. It is a slightly different frame rate, I believe, a slightly different encoding rate. There will be slight color differences, and certainly it can be a problem for older TVs. You might want to, if you should be probably asking if you have something that's encoded in PAL or anything other than NTSC. You should be maybe wondering if this is something that you should actually be having or not, or if you will be able to review it properly. Again, another something like that is we've got field 347 digital file characteristics. Like the 344, OCLC would want you to separate a lot of these into individual fields. So an individual 347 for each region, because there are some separate vocabularies that can be used in separate controlled terms. We have no indicators, and this is technical specifications of the encoding of your video. So we've got subfield A for general type of data. This is a video file. Format in your subfield B, Blu-ray versus DVD. Then in your subfield E, you're going to want to enter your Blu-ray or DVD regions. What kind of regions is your Blu-ray or DVD set to? So DVDs, the United States is region 1. Traditionally, and I'm not sure how DVD, Blu-ray actual player technologies have changed. Traditionally, region coding will prevent you from using watching DVDs from other countries on DVD and Blu-ray players not from that country. That may have changed a little bit. I don't actually know. I have to look into it a little more. If you end up with a DVD that says something like region 0, chances are you have a bootleg in your hand, and that is probably not something you should be entering into your catalog. Chances are, if you are entering a DVD that is, if you have a DVD that is not region 1, people won't be able to play it in their players. And again, I've got it broken out. So if we were to go to, let's just go to regional encoding list right here. So here we have it breakdown. So we've got the code RDA, RE for region encoding, and then you've just got a breakdown of all of the different regions who uses them. So usually region 3 is DVD encoded for Southeast Asia, East Asia, including Hong Kong. So lots of different kinds of things in here. Then this is what the RDA registry kind of looks like. Uh, 380 form of work. There's no indicators in this. Here I have motion picture, and you can actually use a 380 in just about any kind of, any kind of record on any kind of material. So you can use it to differentiate a work from something with a similar title or a different sort of version. So if so you could use this to distinguish from something that has multiple different, from adaptations, for example. So if you had a copy of the book War and Peace, you could have an 830 form of work book. And then if you had a DVD of a movie of War and Peace, you could have an 830 form of work that just said motion picture. And you can separate that from things where you might have, so if you have, for example, the John le Carre novel, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It's a book, it's a television series, and it's a movie. You can use a 380 to distinguish all of these three different versions from each other. Here we're going to move into some note fields. So you can use like with books, you can use a 500 note to encode just about anything you feel you need to get across, but there are some special 5xx note fields that describe various different things. So a lot of these three XX, these are kind of background fields to a slight degree. So here, and this is your 5xx fields are going to be your are going to enable you to get some of the technical specifications across in a way that's a little more readable for your patrons. So you can, so in your 538 system details notes, you can use this to display technical information about the item. So we've got its Blu-ray, the regions it covers, the sound, and importantly that it requires a Blu-ray player. So any kind of device that is going to be required to interpret this work or use this work, you're going to want to have this in here. So if you have video games in your collection, you're in your 538, you're going to make sure you put down requires whatever specific kind of console, requires Nintendo Switch, requires PlayStation 4. Just to cover this, this also applies to any kind of software. Yeah, again, any kind of software item that requires a kind of media to use. If you have something of some sort of very exotic media, you can mention that. We actually have a few laser discs in our collection at Rare Books. I don't know if we don't have a laser disc player, so we unfortunately can't actually watch them. But we do have them, and that is something we should think about in the future, and thinking about collecting in general. Do you have the technology to use them? 546 language note. This is the text version, the plain text version of your 041 field. There's no indicators, but you can use this to add the information about your audio and subtitle tracks. So we've got English, and then in parentheses we have the sound playback channels that it's available for that, Spanish and French in theirs. So we have English, Spanish, and French dialogue. We've got our semicolon, Spanish or French subtitles, and then an additional entry about the subtitled for deaf and hard of hearing, SDH, with descriptive video 2.0. So yeah, anything that you might cover in your 041 field, this is your opportunity to display it in plain text. 511 performer note. First indicator 1 to display that this is the cast. So we have the primary actors in the film. You can also use, we'll mention this later on with in the presentation with audiobooks and music. You can use this to show your narrators or your band members or any other kind of performers, soloist on a record or things like that. Your what's in the chat? Right. 508 creation production credit notes. So just like your 511 was used to cover your performers, your 508 is used to credit your non-cast members of your production. So here we've got music by Michael Giacchino, original Star Wars music by John Williams. You can mention visual effects, costume designers, production designers, editors. Anything you might want to draw attention to in plain text, or however you've got your system, if you've got your system indexing things by keywords. And again, 500 notes should always end with a period. And I mentioned earlier, 500 general notes, just anything you need to describe that's not going to fit in other fields, anything that you want to get across. We can say originally mentioned as a motion picture in 2016, based on characters created by George Lucas, originally released as part of a DVD Blu-ray combo pack. aspect ratios, additional materials, additional attribution. Again, anything that you want to get across to your patrons that you think is going to be useful for them and that you want to make keyword searchable. If you're indexing, if your system is indexing 500 fields. 521 target audience. First indicator is 0, or first indicator 8. Any kind of age rating, any kind of target audience or thing you want to get across, this is your place to do it. So we've got here rating PG-13 for extended sequences of sci-fi violence and action. So any time that you need to get across the, what kind of age range, or if there's any kind of statement explaining why something is rated what it is, this is the field you want to go in. And this is something that can go in other things. So you can have a 521 in a book for a target audience if you wanted to. So things like early reader kind of things, or any kind of thing that you wanted to get a target audience mentioned to. And that's kind of the basics. So again, let's take a quick zoom back. 6xx and 7xx fields, you're going to use them just like you would any kind of other book. Subfield V, drama, is kind of one of your main form subdivisions for motion pictures. But again, make sure that if you're crediting someone in your 245 and probably in your 511, you're going to want to make sure that they have a 700 entry for them with a relationship designator, so that it's searchable, and so that it's findable, and so that people who are looking for actors and directors that they like can find them in your catalog. But that about covers most of the relevant things for DVDs. I suppose I could mention you could have yesterday in the book section I talked about 505 format notes. You can use 505s for if you have multi DVD sets or Blu-ray sets of television shows, where you can use a 505 formatted content notes to break down episodes in a television series from a box set of a television series, listing what disc that they're on, and what episode that they're, and what the episode titles are. Or if you have something that's a compilation of multiple short films, or you have a set that is multiple different films in one set, you can use 505 contents notes to make those keywords searchable and to provide something that your patron can just see looking at the catalog record. So any other questions before we move on to audiobooks and music? Was that call is from? Sorry, my cell phone went off there. But seeing no questions, let's move on and talk about audiobooks and music. So here we have an audiobook for Oathbringer by Brandon Sanderson. Here's the second part of that. And then we have a music CD. We have CD Fragile by Yes, exposing myself as a prog rock guy. And the second part of that. So top here, we're going to run through fixed. So I have all the fields in each one. The top line for those is going to be your it's going to be our audiobook, and the second line is going to be our music CD. So there's going to be a few differences between the two, but most of them are going to have the same applicable things. Excuse me. For type of record, excuse me, I apologize. We've got I for non-musical sound recording and J for musical sound recording. Encoding level blank or 7. Source D for anyone other than the Library of Congress. Audience, again, a variety. Here I've got an E for adult as an example. Control is blank. And then English as the language of the material. In line 2, BL, VLDL, bibliographic level, excuse me, M for monograph, because these are just single objects. Form blank is going to be blank for most audiobooks. And then here, comp, form of composition is a little different. So NN is for not music. RC, and then RC, I believe, is rock music in general. There is a wide variety of possibilities for form of composition, covering just about anything, any kind of genre you can imagine. Accompanying materials, accompanying matter, what kind of materials come with the recording, and you can take a look at those. There's up to 6 bytes that you can enter into there. MRAC is again blank. Country of publication, here we've got NYU for New York. On 3, we've only got 2 objects, part and transposition. These are largely for notated music. So if you have a piece of sheet music, does the item contain parts or notated music in your part section? So no. Is it a transposition or arrangement of another piece of music? And in all these cases, no. N for no. If you're using anything other than an N, make sure to record the transposition or arrangement in a 500 general note field, along with the parts as well. Audio. So our line 4, description, DESCI for if you're using ISBD punctuation, C if you're not if your library is choosing not to use ISBD punctuation. And I'm going to recommend that there is in that OCLC Ask Quality Control, there's a video about what records kind of look like without using ISBD punctuation. It's kind of neat, I think. But I'm a cataloger guy. I think these things are neat. FMUS, format of music. This is oops, that's a typo. It should be N for not a music manuscript or printed music. I'll have to change that real quick. Lit text, literary text for sound recordings. So for our audiobook here, we have F for fiction, and then blank because there's no literary text for this particular piece of music. And then our DTST and our dates. S again is going to be single for single date is most common. Again, we have things like R for reprint or T for publication at copyright dates. So for example, this one is a reprint of a 1971 album done in 2013. And then in our dates, we have current date of current version and date of previous version. Any questions about fixed fields before we dive into the remainder of the audiobook section or the CD section? And I think I saw in someone asked in the notes from yesterday about playaways. I had not thought about playaways. I have not cataloged a playaway in like 7 or 8 years. I'd honestly forgotten that they were a thing still. They'll use some slightly different things, but the rules will be broadly applicable. Our 007 physical description field is a doozy. Because at least partially because there's been a lot of different kinds of formats that music has been encoded on, from vinyl records to wax cylinders to tapes, and onto CDs and others. So here we've just got to break down, but for most CDs, it's going to be pretty much identical. It's a sound recording, it's on a disc, it's a CD. Subfield D is used for different kinds of running speeds. So if you have vinyl records, your different running speeds will be recorded in your subfield D. It's stereo sound. This subfield F is not applicable. It's only for vinyl or cylinders. G, subfield G is actually G. And this is the dimensions of the media. It's not tapes. There's no size of tape. It is mass produced. This is not a this is not a master copy of something. The material type is plastic with metal. This no groove cutting. Again, this is a vinyl record. It's a digital recording, and digital storage and capture techniques were used to generate this object. Again, for most CDs, this is going to be pretty much identical, and this is going to look very different for different kinds of things. So if you collect vinyl records, or if you have tapes, or if you have a playaway, or if you have any kind of other sound medium, it's going to look a little different. O24. Again, your O2X fields, just like any other kind of object, if you have a standard number. So here we've got, in the second one, we've got, we've got international standard music numbers is your second indicator. Author main entry. CD-ROMs too? I'm not sure, honestly. I suspect there will be some kind of there will be some kind of entry that you can enter in. Are you targeting, Veronica? Are you talking about the 007 field, or a 02X field with CD-ROMs? Okay. There's a fair chance that it's going to have that your CD-ROM may have some kind of 02X field. Either ISBN or a UPC or a publisher number. That's entirely possible. So the physical description here, I think. Ooh, that's a good question. Obviously, a lot of the physical recordings are going to be the same. Obviously, for like a CD-ROM, it's probably not going to be necessarily a sound recording. There are a few different things we can look into that. Again, I thinking about it, I haven't cataloged a CD-ROM in forever. So it is something a little different I'll have to look at, but I'll look into that for you. And we can always take a few minutes and look at it a little later on. From Michaela, R007, our individual subfield something new. I've only ever seen the coding without the subfields. That may come down to what are you, Michaela? Are you using? Are you in Connection or an OCLC product or someone else's products or some other cataloging product? Because that may just be a difference between which systems you're using. Some systems like this may have implied subfields. I've got it out because this is how I've got things out that because I use OCLC Connection, and this is how it generally appears for me. C-lens. Yeah, so that may be I think an implied Yeah. So evergreen doesn't, Pam or pause it. Ever use them. So yeah, they're probably implied in this in there. So again, work from again, I'm coming from my experience with OCLC connection. Some things will not necessarily map in the exact same ways. So just watch out for that. Let's go to 100 author main entry. So if you're you'll enter these just like anything else. Musical groups are corporate entries. So we've got a 110, second indicator 2 because they have no jurisdiction. First indicator 2 because they have no jurisdiction. Yes, musical group. And if you're in your 100 field, if your author is also your narrator, you can give them a subfield E with narrator. Otherwise, you're going to want to enter your narrators as 700 fields. 245, title main entry. You do it just as you would as a monograph. Again, we're no longer using subfield H's. These are obsolete in RDA. And it should be from, I think, your preferred source should be your physical object itself. So on your CD, your preferred source for your title and your statement of responsibility, if I'm remembering correctly, should be your physical disk. 250 edition statements. Again, enter statements as you would for monographs. For audiobooks, statements like abridged, things like abridged and unabridged can be considered edition statements. And I feel like that's a pretty, important thing for your patrons to be able to see if they're getting abridged or unabridged. You can also add additional 500 notes to describe this as well, but they should definitely be considered edition statements. Publication information, transcribed just as you would as a monograph. Your container can be used as a source of information. Otherwise, if you can't get any of your publication information from your disk or from your container, you're going to want to put it in square brackets. And for audio, instead of using a copyright sign, the traditional C in a circle, you'll use this little P guy in a circle. I don't know what the Unicode for that one is. But it functions just like a copyright statement. It goes in the 264 second indicator 4. 300 physical description. Record the number of disks and your running time in square brackets. Ooh, got a checklist. Oh, nice. Alt 8471. That's awesome. I'm actually going to write that down because that's great. I love keyboard shortcuts. Okay, again, subfield A, record the number of disks and your running time in parentheses. So here for Oathbringer, we've got 2 parts. So I suspect it's in, the disks are in 2 separate cases. 43 audio disks running at 55.5 hours. Your subfield B, it's digital for sound recordings. And then again, it's 4 3/4 inches for size. This inches right here is almost one of the few times that an abbreviation is used in RDA. Do you have to spell out hours? I think I have it in here because I pulled it straight out of the record. I use catalogger's best judgment. I would generally actually be in favor of spelling out hours just because it's it's easier to just immediately see it and read it. Here we have some 3xx fields for your spoken word audiobook and your performed music. And I've also included here your 344s, your sound characteristics, and your 347 digital file characteristics, which should be fairly similar to for all of them. So for 336 spoken word, audio disc versus 336 performed music. 505 formatted contents notes. You can use this to record track names and authors. So if you go into if you're looking at a Yes album, literally everyone in the band is going to have is going to write, some songs or do some things. Everyone in Yes does everything. But here I've got a 505, first indicator 0 for contents, second indicator 0 blank, but I could have a 0 in it for enhanced. So that's anytime I'm going to use a subfield T or a subfield R or a subfield, anytime I'm going to use, so you'll enter a second indicator 0 for any time you're going to use a subfield in your 505 contents notes, like an R or a T or a G. And you might use that a little more with DVDs than necessarily audiobooks. But if you have an audiobook that has multiple different, if you have an audiobook of short stories or poems by multiple different authors, you could use a formatted content notes with subfield G for which disc, and then subfields T and R for title and statement of responsibility, just like you would in a 245. In 245, yes. 508 creation and production credit note. So, used to credit cast members of production produced by Yes and Eddie Oford. No indicators and separating roles, a semicolon. And here we go, 511 performer notes. So just like with DVDs, you can enter movies, you can enter your performers in here. So 511, indicator 0 for performers, 1 for a cast. So I think there's a big full cast performance of Lord of the Rings, an audiobook. So you could, in theory, you put that as a 1 and then list the full cast. But in this case, I've just got 0 for cast, read by Kate Reading and Michael Kramer. And then for the music CD, I have each of the members of the bands with the things that they do. So we've got John Anderson on vocals, Bill Bruford on drums, percussion, Chris Squire on bass guitar and vocals, and so on. And you can separate the performers with a semicolon from what their different roles are. The only other thing for audiobooks I have here is your 700 fields. So make sure when you've got if you're giving people credit in your 511s or in your 245s, make sure they've got a 700 added entry field with their roles in relator terms in subfield E. So we've got our narrators, Kate Reading, subfield E narrator. So Michael Kramer, his controlled. So Michael Kramer's controlled heading actually has a subfield C with narrator in parentheses to separate him from any other Michael Kramer out there. And so early on we mentioned, so for bands get a 110 corporate author main entry. And you can then enter all of the band members in 700 fields with relator term subfield E's for their roles. So John Anderson, he's the singer. He's also the lyricist, so he wrote lyrics. Instrumentalist, so he's playing an instrument, but he's also writing. And so on right there. And you can repeat subfield E as many times as necessary to cover all of the different roles that band members are playing. And again, just like with books, for audiobooks, you have a series statement, but you can also add in your series statement this subfield S for spoken word to differentiate from your print versions of the series. This is an optional field if your organization wants to track them differently. This is not a required field if you don't want to track your audiobook series differently from your print book series. But if you do, this is an option for you. And that, I believe, is everything I had. So does anybody have any questions, anything they want to ask me, anything they want to talk about, anything that you just want to look up together and we can explore? We can take a look at the RDA registry here if you want. It's kind of a hard site to parse for a little bit, but a lot of things are available under here. RDA values. We can get all the carrier types, all the content types, form of musical notation, where I think there is region encoding, track configuration. We can just look at one of those real quick. Let's look at presentation format. So we have things like IMAX and so on. In the 3 fields, so we have the question, in the 300 field, would you also spell out circa for CA? I would, yes. Just because it's an additional level of clarification. I feel like we use in a lot of previous editions especially with AACR2, we used a lot of abbreviations that didn't really make a lot of sense to anyone who was not a cataloger. I'm thinking of the SL and the SN Latin abbreviations for place of publisher or place of publication unknown. That didn't make sense to anybody who wasn't a cataloger, and was essentially useless to them. So yes, I prefer that. I prefer to avoid abbreviations whenever possible for the sake of clarity, and that's one of the things I appreciate about RDA. Any other questions? Any other thoughts, concerns, stuff you want me to go over real quick? I can go to, let's go to OLAC real quick. So yeah, OLAC has a lot of great resources. If you go under cataloging resources, publications and training materials, I believe. Yeah, here we've got some final recommendations on 3xx, 33x, and 34x. And here we've got, yes, the best practices for cataloging DVD and Blu-ray discs using MARC 21, or using RDA MARC 21. It is 200 pages. It's very dense. It's a very good resource. I would definitely recommend checking it out. Searchable. So Veronica asked, what about searchable terms in Spanish patrons? So are you thinking about subject headings, or to be, I guess, be a little more specific? Subject headings. Yeah, I mean, there are, let's see. So we routinely strip out foreign language subject headings at USC, just kind of on policy, I guess. There are thesauruses out there, I believe, for Spanish language subject headings. Off the top of my head, I don't know. Off the top of my head, I couldn't cite any of them. but you can use various 6xx fields with a second indicator of 7, and then use any one of those thesauruses with the same kind of way that you do subject headings. So, with your core, your subject heading in subfield A, your general division subfield X, and so on, and then have a subfield 2 citing the thesaurus that you're using. I know there are thesauri for Spanish language subject headings. I can't cite off the top of my head what any of them are, unfortunately, just because we don't use a lot of foreign language subject headings at USC. Let me just take a quick. Okay, the Biblioteca Nacional de España has an authorities catalog. These are all kind of old. Maybe these are. No, this is not a very good. No, that's not a very good answer. Okay, but yeah, we can look at. I can look into that, or but there are Spanish language headings out there. But yeah, you'll want to use that second indicator 7, and a subfield 2 to indicate your source. Laura M, for music CDs, how do you feel about RDA aspect? The RDA aspect, 1xx field is used only for the person who wrote all the songs in the album, as opposed to AACR2, which is used it for the performer. That's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that before. I'm not really sure. I mean, I feel like that might be just like a cataloger's best judgment kind of call right there. How do you feel about RDA aspect that the 1xx field is used only for the person who wrote all the songs in the album, as opposed to the performer? I guess my kind of thought is so long as you have 7xx fields covering all of these people, they're still going to be searchable. They're still going to be findable in an author search. And if you have your relator codes, in it. Yeah, no, I mean, it's not going to come down to how are your patrons going to be searching for something? That's kind of my thought. And again, so long as it's in a 7xx field, the same search that would turn up a 1xx field is still going to find that 7xx role person. And then with your relationship designators, your subfield E's, you can clarify what exactly their role in producing this object is. I do kind of feel like, though, performers, I do feel kind of like performers should be in your 1xx field. I mean, I've got in this record that I've got that I pulled up in connection, if I can go down to it. We've got the band, yes, listed as our 1x, because that's what people are looking for. They're looking for the band, but I feel like that's performer, your performer in your 1xx is more reasonable in my opinion. But so long as they've got that 700 field coverage, it should perform identically in a search, in theory at least. All right. If there's no other questions, I think we can call it here for the day. I hope everybody, I hope this was useful for everybody, and I hope I didn't ramble too much, I guess. Um, but thank you all for coming out and letting me talk about cataloging for, an hour plus. I, you know, it's what I do, and it's,